All right, so I am going to start. All right, I'm glad everybody got on and hopefully nobody had any problems because the way it looks and the way I'm reading online, we'll probably be doing this tomorrow as well, just so you know. All right, so I'm going to do two things today. First, we're going to go over, and it probably won't take that long, we're going to go over the user navigation and the recycler view, which are the last things that are in here. Hold on. All right, hello, Gabriel.
Hello?
Yeah, gotcha. Now, did you have a test for COVID?
Yeah, I took the test yesterday, but I haven't got results back.
All right. Okay, well, like I said, what we're going to do today is two things. First, we're going to finish this Unit 4, Lesson 4, talking about two topics, user navigation and a little bit on Recyclerview. And it's, I think, for lack of better words, kind of funny that they only gave Recyclerview 10 pages, and it's the last 10 pages of this chapter, when, to me, it's one of the more important concepts that we will talk about. So we will talk about it in more depth and breadth of coverage than what they have in the book, and we're going to go through some examples. All right, so that said, first I want to go through this user navigation section. And they talk here, starting on page 85, about two different types of navigation. The one most of us are used to is back navigation, where there is a back button and you just keep going back and back and back. And typically the way it works, again, in an Android app, and they'll show you this in a page or two, is, you've got your launcher activity, which is either going to be your splash screen or your main activity. And you can go to other screens, but if you keep clicking the back button, eventually you're going to get either to that launcher activity or to your main activity. Whatever the launcher is what I'm saying. Okay, so they talk about that. And then they talk about hierarchical navigation, as it says, where users navigate through a hierarchy of screens. All right. And the first thing they talk about in here is back button navigation. And the good news about this is typically there's not much you have to do in order to do this. All right. It's built into Android. All right. So there's nothing special that you have to do here. So what they're mentioning is, if you were in the launcher screen and you went to A1 and then you went to A2, etc., and from here you went to A2, B1, whatever that is, and you press the back button, you'd go here. If you press the back button here, and if you press the back button, you'd go here. Nothing surprising about that, I don't think. But as they mention here on the bottom of page 86, you don't have to manage the back button on your app. It's handled by the back stack automatically by Android. As it says, the back button by default simply traverses this list of screens. The back stack is basically, it's a listing. It's kind of like a regular program stack that's got a listing of what method called what method, or what function called what function. And it's a last in, first out type of structure. So the last one that was actually called, or in this case, the last one shown, will be the first, the last one that you stop showing will be the first one that's shown when you go back. And they mention here that typically when you do this, it says that typically by default, when you go back from one screen to another, it just does a finish. But as they mention here on the top of page 87, it is possible, because there is a method, built-in method of the activity class, that's called onBackPressed. All right. Now, why would you want to put some code in there? Well, as an example, if you had a screen and maybe you were filling up database information or whatever, and it wasn't going to be actually saved until you literally hit a save button, you could, for example, give the user some kind of a message that says, hey, do you want to save the data you're working on before you go back to another screen? Just as an example. All right. So next they talk about hierarchical navigation, and what they're getting to in here is different ways. They're basically showing right here, they're showing a 3-level hierarchy. All right. And you've got, as it says here, you've got this news app, and that's at level 1. You've got your different types of stories basically, and that's level 2. And then the individual stories themselves, and that's level 3. And when you create this, hold on a sec. Okay, I'm trying to figure out why I'm getting a message that says there's still people in the lobby when everybody's here, but okay. So what they're saying here is there's different ways that you can set this up. Probably the poorest way to set this up would be to come in here and let's say that you had, there's 4 here, but let's just assume these are the top 4 stories. These are the top 4 tech news. These are the top 4 cooking stories, etc. You really could make those into 3 different activities and literally add hyperlinks or add buttons in there and go to each one of the stories. All right, that would be a way of doing it. But as you'd guess, you know, what happens if you get more? If you decide you want to put the top 10 stories, putting in 10 buttons on a phone screen usually doesn't work very well. It's not that you can't do it, but typically you wouldn't do it. So this right here, this probably would be your main activity where it says News App. That'd be your parent screen. Now they call them level 1, 2, and 3. I've always been told that these are level 0, 1, and 2. It doesn't matter. There's 3 levels regardless, or 3 layers regardless of which way you look at it. So as it says, the parent screen enables navigation down to child screens. Well, that should make sense. You go from here to here. So again, these 3 screens or whatever they happen to be, all right, top stories, tech news, and cooking, these 3 screens are all children of News App. Now, one thing, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to you or not, we talked a little bit yesterday or Monday, I don't remember, about fragments. And one thing I mentioned with fragments is it is possible when you use fragments to basically split the screen up into sections. Now, to me, this would be a butt ugly type of screen, but you probably could set this up that you could put all 3 of these here, the top stories, the tech news, and the cooking, onto one activity. You'd probably then make it a landscape activity so you had some more width, and then you could split it up into thirds as an example. Now, you might think, well, that'd be really ugly or whatever. I'm just saying that it would be possible to do that. All right. But they start talking about the parent screen then on page 88. And they say there that it enables down navigation down to the child screens. So you go from here to here. You don't typically go right from here down to here. All right. Would it be possible for you to do that? Yes, depending on how you write it, but it would be probably more trouble than it would be worth. All right. So this, again, it says in the first level of siblings, the child screens may be collection screens that collect all these headlines. All right. And when you go from top stories to news to tech news, top stories to cooking, or one of these combinations, that's referred to as lateral navigation, because it's like you're going from brother to brother, or brother to sister, or sister to brother, etc. They're on the same level. When you go down, so when you go from top stories to one of these stories, that's called Descendant navigation. And when you go in the other direction, so if you go up from top stories to News App, that's called Ancestral Navigation. I mean, do you have to know those? No, but I'm just giving you the stuff that's mentioned in the book. Now that's on page 88. And I know I'm not on page 88, but I wanted to be able to show it to you pictorially in here. I thought that it would make more sense to do that. All right. So it says here, main activity with an activity for each child. And this is kind of what I talked about before. It says if the first level child screen siblings have another level underneath them, you should implement the first level as an activity. So in other words, what they're saying is it wouldn't be a good idea to do what I told you could do, and that is make these each fragments, because at least top stories has stuff underneath it. So this should be an activity in and of itself. Really, so should this, and really, so should this. Now, if you only had three things that you were checking on, top stories, tech news, and cooking, then you could, up in News App up here, you could put 3 buttons. One that would take you to your top stories, one to your tech news, one to your cooking. All right. There's so many different ways that you can do this and so many different ways that you can lay things out. And I mean, that's one of the things that's discussed in this chapter. All right. So first, this is what they recommend: main activity with an activity for each child. But if you don't want to do that, as mentioned on the bottom of page 89, you can do it with a fragment for each child as well. All right. And they're saying you can do that if there's not another level. So I guess you could even do something like you could have this in its own activity and combine these two in an activity. There's just so many different variations that you could use depending on what it is you want to do. So there's what I mentioned to you before on page 90. That's ancestral navigation. So that's going up. All right. And typically in order to do that, this is not hitting a back button. All right. It could be that you hit the back button and you get there, but there is a difference here between using a back button and using an up button. And they mentioned this on the bottom of the page that we're currently on. It says the back button provides navigation to your previous screen. The up button provides ancestral navigation. So in other words, if I went from here, this screen right here, the top stories, to the tech news screen, and I hit the back button, I would go back to top stories. If I went from here and I used an up button, I'd go back up to news app. And that's what they're trying to talk about in here. Again, is it that important? Well, the author says yes, in that this is the kind of thing when you are creating a more complex app that you have to think about as far as laying everything out. And this is the up button right here. Would not be a back button. The back button is usually shown on the bottom of your Android screen, way in the left. All right. So descendant, as we said, it's when you're working your way down. So it's like descending versus ascending. All right. As it says, you enable the user to go from a parent to a first level, or in this case, from a first level to a second level. All right. And you could have more levels than this. They're just showing a fairly simplistic example. All right. Then on page 92 here, it says the best practice for descendant navigation is to use buttons or simple targets. Well, hopefully you remember we've already done this. This doesn't look that different from what I asked you to do for the resume app. All right. Except you had a picture here and we had whatever it was, 4 buttons, I think it was. One for work history, one for education, one for an email me, and one for a call me. All right. But we were running through this kind of stuff already, is what I'm trying to tell you. And again, they give you what they consider, some tips in here. Buttons and simple targets are rarely used for navigation from section siblings within a collection. We're going to talk about carousels and lists and cards in just a bit. And they also mentioned that if this is your main screen right here, this number 1, that's typically going to be referred to as your program's dashboard. All right, that's all that stuff is in here. Now, kind of an important concept here. Very bottom of page 92. I'm not going to read it to you, but they do mention if you wanted to see an example of how layouts work, click the link here. And of course, that's going to get us to Developer Android, because the only layout we've really talked about in here so far, the only type of layout that we've talked about has been a constraint layout. All right, but there are other kinds of layouts as well. In fact, we're going to go through an example. We're going to write something in a little bit. And when we do that example, we're going to use a linear layout just so you've got some experience and you've seen what it's like to use a different kind of layout. All right. So the next thing they talk about in here is what's referred to as a navigation drawer. And they say it's a panel that usually displays navigation options on the left. I kind of look at it, and this may not be the best analogy, but I kind of look at it as kind of like being a table of contents for your app. And that's the kind of stuff that you'd put in there. All right. Now, this could point you to screens. This could point you to different things. It depends on what you're trying to do. And they give an example on the bottom of the page here On the bottom of page 93, the author says, a good example of a navigation drawer is in the Gmail app, which provides access to the inbox, labeled email folders, and settings. All right, it says the best practice for employing a navigation drawer is to provide descendant navigation from the parent activity to all children. All right, so again, this would be the parent basically, and these would be the children. Now, you could very well write an app, in fact, we have, that doesn't use any of this stuff. Or if you really start to write a complex app where you want to allow the user the chance to do a lot of things. Case in point, let's just pretend for a second that for one of your final project, that one of you decides you're going to write your own Facebook or something like that. All right, then you could come over here and you could put the different kinds of options, search options, etc., that Facebook provides. They give you some general steps here on page 94. I'm not going to read these to you. In fact, they talk about how to create the navigation drawer layout on 94. They show you some code for actually doing it on page 95 right here. Then they show you pictorially what it'll look like with the way they're laying it out on page 96. All right, and give you some kind of hints and stuff on page 97. Then there's more code on page 98 for the navigation drawer header. All right, and that header is what they showed back up here. All right, and they go through all the different steps. So they've got the layout of an app bar on page 99. And again, they give you some hints, and that's also on page 100. And then finally, jumping up to page 101, they show you how you can populate this. All right. And again, it's going to change depending on what it is you're trying to do. So the code they show in here that takes up most of page 101, or at least the bottom half of the page, is pretty much the code that you would use back for what we looked at back on page 90 something. All right, if you wanted to go and build a navigation drawer. By no means do you have to build one of these for your final project. Can you? Certainly. Do you have to? No. All right. I mean, if I go through there and I say, hey, for you to do your final project, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, I probably could go to all the trouble of going through this handout here, and I'll bet you there's probably a couple hundred things that are in here as far as different things that I could potentially have you put in a final project. That'd be ridiculous. All right, there's going to be a few things that I am going to expect you to have on one or more pages of your project. And in fact, one of those will be the recycler view here that we're going to start talking about shortly. All right, so I'm up to the middle of page 104 where they talk about lists and carousels. And as it says, use a scrolling list like a recycler view to provide navigation targets for descendant navigation. We're going to look at that in just a minute. Now, the recycler view, believe it or not, is fairly new in Android. All right, before the recycler view, there was something that was, and it still exists, that's referred to as a list view. All right, was actually much easier to use than the recycler view, but not as powerful. And not only was it not as powerful, it was a lot slower as far as the amount of time that it took to refresh your screen. And that's one of the reasons that recycler views were created. And when you create these lists, typically they're vertical scrolling lists, but you can make them horizontal scrolling lists. If they're a horizontal scrolling list, they're referred to as a carousel. You may or may not remember, but one of the things that we talked about in the AWD1112 class first semester was we went through and we looked at Bootstrap, and one of the things that we did in there is we built a carousel of images, and that went not in a vertical, but in a horizontal direction. And that's what they're talking about here. Now it says you learn about Recyclerview in another chapter. Yeah, it's coming up in about 10 or 15, about about 5 to 10 pages. All right. Next, they talk here about a master detail navigation flow. All right, and it says, when you have this, a master screen contains a list of items, and the detailed screen shows the detailed information about one item. All right, it says usually you implement this in one of these ways, and I don't want to read it to you. All right, basically you use an intent or you use a fragment. It depends on what you're doing and how you want to do it. All right, we're going to again start to look at some of this today and look at a little bit more of it in depth tomorrow. All right, so as they mentioned here on the top of page 105, it says here, smartphones are best suited for displaying one screen at a time. Well, you know that, even with a bigger phone. And I look at my phone here, I've got a Samsung, and I look at it as being a bigger phone. It's about, I guess it's about the same size as my kids have got the newest iPhone. But still, it works best when you only have a screen on there. All right, so it says, for example, all right, if you clicked on General, this would be the master screen, you'd go over there, and whatever that would be. If you clicked on Notifications, it would be a different screen over here. All right. Now, they say, on the other hand, when you're using a tablet, especially a tablet layout view, all right, it says that you can put the master on the left and the detail on the right. So this becomes, again, almost like a table of contents here. And back in the old days, if you this is not before your time, but it was really, I don't know, right? Probably around the time most of you were born, that it used to be when you were writing programs in, not programs, but when you were writing HTML and you were setting up pages, over here, you use what are called frames, all right? And here you'd have headings and whatever. I probably have told you this story, and I don't want to bore you with it, but I still remember that one of the first semesters that I taught here, in fact, it was at the school I used to be at, what we had here was, this was a list of hyperlinks that went from A to Z, and students had to make their own coloring book. So A was for alligator, so if you clicked on that link, you got a coloring page over here of an alligator. B for bear, etc. You get the idea. All right. And again, there's an example right there. There's a back button right there, as opposed to the up button, like I said, which is there. All right. So options in the menu bar, I'm up to page 107. It says here, the app bar typically contains the options menu, most often used for navigation patterns. It may also, again, contain an up button. All right. Now, where this stuff can become important, we're gonna do a lot of this stuff very incrementally when we transition this over to Recyclerview, because they talk about tabs and swipes. And I want to get into both of them right now. Right here on your screen, on this thing right here, and hopefully you can all see this, this here is an example of tabs. In other words, if I want to be able to jump right from here to top stories, I can click that tab. If I want to go to here, I can click that tab. If I want to go to here, I can click that tab, type of an idea. All right. So it says, if your app provides several categories of stories, like the one shown here, you would want to provide your users the ability to navigate from one category to the next, or from one top story to the next. So again, we would want to be able to do that if I went from here and then I clicked here, etc. That lateral type of navigation. All right. And it says, again, that one way you can do this is to use tabs. As mentioned, I'm on the top here of page 108. Tabs appear across the top of a screen. All right. Tab navigation is a common solution for lateral navigation when one child screen to another child screen. In other words, when they're siblings, as it says here. Now, and as they mentioned, typically you're only going to do that if you've got a small amount of real estate. In other words, you wouldn't do this if you had 10 different headings or whatever. They mentioned that 3 or 4 is probably the most you really want to have in there. And the benefits are shown here. Because it's a single initially selected tab, you've got access. You can move around quicker. That's the biggest thing, and that's what they mentioned there. You can navigate quickly between screens, all right, without having to go to the parent or back to the dashboard, all right? Then they give you some best practices here on the bottom of page 108. And as the author says here, tabs are usually laid out horizontally, all right? They should always run along the top of the screen. They shouldn't be aligned to the bottom, all right? They should persist across related screens, and switching to another tab shouldn't be treated as history. In other words, you don't necessarily want that if you go to another screen from there, that your back button brings you back to where you were. All right. Then starting on 109, they give you, and I'm not going to read to you, but they give you the way that you would set a tabbed layout. All right. Now, depending on what you're doing for your final project, this might be something you want to implement. But as an example, let's say you were going to create a game. You probably would not want to implement it that way, because if you were going at different screens that were for different levels, you wouldn't want to be able to just be on one level, like on level 1, and click a button or click a tab rather, and go to level 4. That wouldn't make sense. So again, as always, it depends on what you're trying to do, what the app is attempting to do. So they show you on 110 how to define a tab layout. And after you do that, basically this is what you get. So they're assuming we clicked here, and then you'll be right there, and these are the top stories. You click here. You can see by the one that's whitish, and most whitish in color, how you can move from tab to tab. All right. All right. Then finally, they talk here a little bit about fragments. All right. And as it says, a fragment is a behavior or a portion of a UI within an activity. It's even more than that. It's an activity within an activity. So kind of look at it that it's a screen within a screen, for lack of better words. As it says, it has its own life cycle. Now, why is that important? Well, what you might want to do, and we haven't even talked about some of this stuff yet, but as an example, when you go into, and you start building a page, let's say you were building a page and you wanted to simulate a web page. All right, so maybe on part of the web page you had text, on another part maybe you had an image carousel, on another part you maybe had a YouTube video, etc. You could take each one of those and implement them on the same page using a fragment. All right, just as an example. Now, as always, and I'm not going to click here, but it says if you want to really know more about it, you click the link right there, and that's going to bring you to developer.android.com. All right, so add a class for each fragment, all right, representing each screen the user can visit by clicking a tab. Each class, as mentioned here on the top of page 112, should extend fragment and inflate the layout associated with the screen. So they give you some examples in here. All right. They also set it up so you can have a page adapter. Anytime you have an adapter, it's a communication mechanism. So if you want to be able to flip back and forth between different things, you could use a pager adapter to do that. And they show you some code for doing that on the bottom of page 112. Finally, on 113, they show you, again, as you can see, how to create an instance of the tab layout, how to manage your screens with a listener. All right. You want to make sure when you click on, if you're using a fragment to kind of separate out what you've got on your screen, you want to make sure that when you click that part of the screen, that it's handled correctly. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. Finally, the last thing that's discussed here on page 114, as it says, using pager for swipe views, for if you want to do horizontal paging. All right. Again, probably the majority of paging rather is done in a vertical manner, but you can page horizontally too. All right. I've already read things that say, don't ever do that, and they'll give you a bunch of reasons. All right. Let's finish this up then. So I am on page 116, and like I said, the last approximately 10 pages of the chapter talk about the recycler view. All right. And they're just, for lack of better words, kind of wetting your whistle for this. I'm trying to come up with maybe a couple of examples in case we meet like this tomorrow, and it looks like we will, where we can build a couple of simple apps using Recyclerviews so you can start to get your feet wet as far as how to use them. And as they mention here, when you display a large number of items in a scrollable list, so imagine here that we had 100 of these. Typically, you set it up so you can only see about 10 to 12 at a time. And then once you start to flip your way through those, and once I get up, maybe a little higher, what's going to happen is these are going to be replaced. So if inflate was at the top, I would have a bunch of new things in here. So I'm not talking about having just 12 things and changing its order. I'm talking about having a multiple number of things. And as you're scrolling up, again, kind of like your contacts list. All right. So it also says it could be from a data set, and we'll get into that when we start talking about databases. All right. Now, again, this is one of the places where the old-fashioned list view started to break down. And this is one of the reasons that the recycler view was created. So as they mention here on the very bottom of page 116, from a performance perspective, you want to conserve memory and save time. To conserve memory, as it says, minimize the number of view items that exist at any given point. So right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And believe it or not, there's more than 11. Typically, if you had 11 like this, there'll really be about 15. Because the assumption is you're going to want to basically scroll up. So it keeps a few in reserve. So as you start to scroll up, you've got those there. All right. And to save time, it says minimize the number of view items that you have to create. Well, that's minimizing it to and setting it up to 11 in this case. So again, to accomplish both these goals, it says create more view items than the user can see and cache the created view items. All right. You do need to have all of them. All right. So if you're going to have 100 different things, you do need to put all 100 of them someplace. All right. So as it says there, then reuse the view items with different data as you work your way through here. So this would be an example, as it says there. There's an inbox, contact lists are a good example, and there's other things as well. All right. Again, we're going to start doing some of these tomorrow already. So bottom of page 117, as the author says, the Recyclerview class is a more advanced and flexible version of list view. All right. In fact, a lot of people will tell you, because when I first started teaching this stuff, we were using list views. All right. And most people will tell you now they just don't ever use a list view. It's too archaic. That virtually every instance of a list view, if it hasn't been replaced with a recycler view, it should be. And as they mentioned there, it's a container for displaying large scrollable data sets efficiently by maintaining a limited number of data items. You use it, as they mentioned there, when you need to show a lot of data and you want to be able to scroll your way through it. Now, in my humble opinion here, I'm on page 118. This list of Recyclerview components, and they're just listing them here, and it's on 2/3 of a page. This, by far, in my opinion, is the most important page out of the 118 we've gone through in here and the ones that we've gone through in lessons 1, 2, and 3. Because it tells the components that you need to work on when you're using a Recyclerview. So I'm going to mention these now, but they're not really going to make a lot of sense until you create some applications that use Recyclerviews. And I will tell you that, when we did this last year, and it was Keegan and it was Angie in the class, and neither one of them, even by the end of it, really had a liking for Recyclerviews, because there's a lot you have to do in order to get them to work. All right. So the first thing is, it says there is data, which can come from anywhere. So, for instance, last year we did this thing, and I think I either showed it to you or told you about it, where we created a Recyclerview that had all 46 presidents in there. All right. And when you clicked on a president, it would show you when you clicked on that president, you could go in there and you could get some more information about the president. All right. That individual one. All right. And that data, literally, the pictures I grabbed from the internet. So we just put in internet addresses, but the other stuff we added. There's absolutely no reason that you can't get data. As it says, you could pull it from the cloud. So you can grab data from the internet. The only thing you're going to have to worry about there is if you're grabbing data from an external source like the cloud, would be if somehow, either the internet was down or somehow they changed, the address of where something was. So after the data, the second thing there is mentioned is the recycler view itself. Again, a scrolling list that contains list items. All right. Next, a layout. So we have to go, and this will be the first time we'll be creating our own layout. So if I've got something that looks like this right there, you'll notice when you look here, each one of these are the same. And what I mean is they've got a name, they've got, maybe that's the main title or whatever it is. That's probably the contact or who the email is from, some kind of a subject line, and then some text. And the idea is if I click right here, wow, I'm Jennifer Scott now. But if you click right here, it's going to open up that email. The point of telling you that is all of these are set up in basically the same way. All right. So in other words, you've got something here, another thing below it, another thing below that, and a couple of icons. So what you do in the layout manager is you set up the way that any one of these individual records, or whatever you want to call these items, list items that are in here, the way each one is going to look. That's what goes into the layout for one item of data. All right. And you have the layout for each one. You set the layout up in the layout manager. There's three ways that you can do that. You can either set it up as a linear layout, which is the one I use virtually all of the time. There's also a grid layout that you can use. And the other one might be in here. I don't remember what it is offhand. All right. So we've got data. We've got the recycler view. We've got the layout for one data item that we're putting in our layout manager. We've also got an adapter. And the adapter, we've talked about adapters before. You used an adapter for your spinner when we did the calculator. Well, this adapter is going to make sure that our program is able to understand, converse with our data. All right. So as it says, use an extension of Recyclerview adapter. All right. It prepares the data and how it will be displayed in a view holder. The view holder is the last thing that's in there. All right. And it says it contains the information for displaying one item using the items layout. And it's for the rest of the chapter here, they go into a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage on each one of these things. I wouldn't say a lot, but a little bit. So let's take a quick look. The data, again, can come from anywhere. All right. And I think I mentioned this to you. I'll just show you this real quick. I think I may still have it up. Of course I don't. All right. When we worked on this president's program, and I don't know if you can still see my screen, if you see my granddaughter now or not. All right. But when we worked on this president's program, our data looked like this. Can you see that on your screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So in other words,
Yes.
what are we creating here? Well, we created a president class in our program. Each president had a first name, a last name, a term of office, and then a thing over here that linked to a picture of them. All right. So that would be an example of just using text, for lack of better words. Quite often when you're doing this, you're going to get the stuff through a database. All right. Or you're going to be saving it to a database, or both. But as it says, it can also be images. It can be virtually anything, any kind of data. So that's what they're saying. It can come from any source. What I want to get to eventually, as I mentioned to you, is to have us build a to-do list and put that into a recycler view. So as we go and add new items, they go in there. All right. Okay. So that's the data. The recycler view then, as it says here, halfway down on page 119, it's a view group for a scrollable container. It's used for long lists of data, and the data that you put in there, each look at it is mainly, maybe for example, almost like a list of database records where each record has the exact same format. All right. Again, it uses a limited number of view items that are reused when they go off the screen. The layout, as it says, for a specific list item, before you put the layout into a layout manager, you have to create an XML file. All right, when you create an XML file, what does that mean? Well, that means that we're going to lay out pictorially how we want that particular layout manager to look. In other words, again, going back to this, we would have to lay that out on there where we had, for example, it might be a text view, a text view, and a text view, and an icon, or whatever. Doesn't really matter, but you've got to lay it out. All right, the layout manager, as it says then, positions view items inside of a view group. All right, so to reuse it, as it says, or recycle, hence the name Recyclerview. All right, a layout manager may ask the adapter to replace contents with different ones as you work your way through. Here's the three I mentioned before. All right, the linear is the one we're going to use. We may get into grid. I don't remember, with the examples if we're going to or not. The staggered I've never used, but the staggered is kind of cool because with the staggered, you can lay stuff out all over the place on the screen. All right, there's not as much rhyme or reason to it as if you use a linear layout or a grid layout. What you can do, and I've never really been real successful with this, but I think we're going to hopefully at least try it, and that is you can animate when you're working with a recycler view. So in other words, you can have things kind of fade in, fade out, and when something goes away, etc., you can change color on the one that's the active one, etc. There's a lot of different stuff that you can do with that. All right. Next is an adapter, and as mentioned here, an adapter helps two incompatible interfaces work together. In a recycler view, that's your data and the actual code that's making the recycler view work, for lack of better words. All right. And it says here, it acts as an intermediary between the data and the view. Now, why is that important? Well, if you look right above this list here, it says the recycler view implements a view holder. When we do this, what's going to happen is you're going to get an error message. In fact, you're going to get a lot of error messages as you start to create this. And when you go in to implement the view holder, you'll get red squigglies. And when you click on the red squiggly, it'll say, hey, if you want to use this view holder, you've got to implement these three methods: on create view holder, on bind view holder, and get item count. And you just say okay, and you highlight all of them, click a button, and they're all in there. Now that's the good news. The bad news is you still got to write the code. This one isn't hard. The get item count, as it says, it just returns the number of items of data that the adapter is holding. So if I've got a list with 100 names on it, I can just return the size of my list.count as an example. The other two are typically, going to cause you to write more code. So the first one there says on create view holder, it inflates. We talked about inflates yesterday. It inflates or creates a view item, and it returns a new view holder that contains it. As it says, this method is called when the recycler view needs a new view holder to represent an item. So that'll create the view holder, then you've got to bind it. As it says, that sets the contents of a view item at a given position. So you can kind of look at it this way with the on create view holder and the on bind view holder. So if I'm working my way up here and I start to scroll my way up, all right, basically it's going to be a lot of redrawing that's going to be done. So once this gets to the top and I've got a bunch of new names in there, the onCreate Viewholder will sit there and add, basically format and set up and create that new name and all that information. And the onBind Viewholder will put it in its list on the recycler view. Hopefully that made at least a little bit of sense to you. And finally then is the view holder itself on the bottom of page 120 here. And as it says, a Recyclerview Viewholder describes a view item and the metadata about its place within the recycler view. It actually makes sense, and I found this really, I thought, nice article on this that explained it, and I'm looking for it right now. All right, and that's one of the reasons we're going to go through some of this tomorrow, because I'll send you that article before class starts. So it says there, you define your view holder in an XML resource file. It can contain almost any type of view, including clickable elements. To actually implement this then, we got 4 more pages to cover on here. So as they mentioned, to actually implement a recycler view, it's a 6-step process. I don't want to read to you. It's going to make more sense when we actually start to do it. All right. But there's code that you're going to have to be putting in to your .java file, and there's extra .java files you're going to have to put in order to get all this stuff to work. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Okay. Adding the dependency, I talked about this yesterday. I don't think we're going to have to do this. All right. And what I'm saying is, let's see. Yeah, I've been bringing something up, playing around with some stuff in here. So let's see. Let's do this file. Let's close the project and then just quickly create a new one. All right. And I'll just create an empty activity. I'm just going to buzz through this real quick. We'll just accept everything and just finish. All right. So if I come through here and I want my XML file, all right, it's going to take a second to load, but I just want you to see this. Like I said, we'll take a break in about 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we're going to write some code. We will be done no later than 2 o'clock. I guarantee that. All right. So when we come in here, design editor is unavailable after a successful project. Jeez Louise. And it's saying here that it failed. I'm getting all these failure things whenever I try to do anything lately, and I don't even know why. Ever since I went back and I uninstalled and reinstalled, I've had nothing but problems. So I can come into here. Hopefully this will work. And I've got to go to Android Studio and I've got to tell it to run it as an administrator. Usually that'll fix it. I don't like doing this, but hey, if I can get it to work, fine. All right, it still failed, but I'm wondering if it's going to allow me to bring this up in my activity. No, it's not. All right. Well, I'll have to go fix that. But in the activity main, what I'm trying to tell you is this. When we've got our list of tools over here, what's going to happen is there'll be one for Recyclerview. And I think I told you this yesterday, but in case I did not, it used to be when you chose that and you dragged it out here, it would come out and it would give you an error message. And it would say, you've got to go into your Gradle file and update Gradle to make sure that it knows what you're trying to do here with a Recyclerview. Now, usually, when I did it last time, it just comes up and it says, "Hey, you're bringing in a Recyclerview. Do you want me to upgrade your Gradle file for you?" And you say yes, and it does it for you automatically. All right. Okay. Adding a Recyclerview to the activity layout. Again, I'm not going to go through this. It's got the steps, and we're going to start working on those, like I said, hopefully tomorrow. Creating the layout for one item. As you can see, this is just one of our XML files, so you can put anything you want in there. All right. Creating an adapter. These are the three things that we talked about before. So there's the on create view holder, there's the on bind view holder, and there's the get item count. As you can see, the get item count is kind of the nice one because it usually has very little code you have to put in. But you're going to have to end up writing a view holder class. This is kind of neat, for lack of better words. And what I mean is, this will be the first time when we write this in Java, we will create what's called an inner class. So in other words, we're going to create a class right inside of one of our classes, which is, in this language at least, is totally legitimate to do. And then finally, they give you these steps for creating the recycler view here, tying it all together on page 124. All right, so we are going to take a break, but just quickly before we do, all right, I'd like everybody then please to do one thing, and that is, and I'm going to see if I can get mine to work, but we'll check. So let's see, close my project. You can all do this though, all right? And if for some reason I have problems, I'm still going to give you the code, and we're going to work through it anyway. I'd like everybody please to start up a new project. So if you're not in Android Studio, please start up Android Studio. Start up a new project, make it an empty activity. Click on next, and we're going to call this tip space calculator. You can run the words together if you want. It really and truly does not matter. All right. Make sure your package name looks like it's set okay, your location, etc. Make sure we're using Java. The minimum SDK should be just fine for this, and click finish. Again, I'm probably going to get an error because I have been lately. It's getting worse here and not better, but I'm going to try to work through this as best I can. All right. I'm going to try to fix that error during the break. So if you've been able to do that, that's good. After the break, we're going to go into our activity main file, and we are going to write, it says sync in progress. Well, hopefully it'll sync. We are going to write this, and we're going to write this rather than doing it pictorially. We're going to write this using our code window for our XML file. And there's probably about, I don't know, 70 or more lines. And then we're going to write the code. I'm going to give you all the code. We're going to do it together. And I'm going to ask that by the end of the day today, you submit what I'm giving you. In other words, push it up to a repo. All right. And the reason for that is we all got emails today from Ms. Bruggeman that said, make sure you do some kind of an in-class activity. All right. And it's not hard for me to do this because there's only 5 of you. But for example, it's harder for like Mr. Corrigan because in his morning class, he's got about 20 people. But I'm still supposed to give you an activity, and that'll be based on whether or not you're marked present or not. So just upload this thing that we'll do together, and as long as you upload it by the end of the day, you'll be marked here. And then we'll do the same kind of thing tomorrow. All right, it's 12:58. Let's come back, please, at 1:10. I'll see you then. Jesus. All right, hopefully you're back. I'm back, and we're going to have to do this the way I didn't want to do it, but it's okay. I've already got a working copy, but it won't let me bring that up either, so. All right. So this is what I'm going to have you do. All right. I'd like you to please bring up your activity main.xml file, and I'm going to show you what I want you to change it to. And that is right here. So this is a total of 103 lines. So it'll take a little bit of time. This will not be the same, just so you know, if you look on the screen here, that is your package name right there. See that? My package name is edu.rankin.jpscott. Yours is going to be whatever your package name is. All right. I'm taking for granted that all 5 of you are back. You all hear me. And if you called yours tip calculator, the only thing you should have to change in here that I know of is this path that's right in here. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen. Let's see if I make it a little smaller. Yeah. And that'll get you started. So I'll bring up about 20 lines or so at a time. So I will change this in about 5 minutes. Try to type as quickly as you can, please. You know what?
On your line 5, I see
Yeah.
there's HTTP schemas Android.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that should be Android. That's interesting. I didn't type this. All right, you're right. It should be that. In fact, what I think I'm going to do, I am going to send you this one, and we'll type the other one in together. All right, so let me grab this and save it. And I'm going to make a copy of it. So I'm going to do a save as and throw it on my desktop, and I'm going to send it to all of you, each of you. All right. I mean, to sit there and have you spend X amount of time just typing this in is a waste. So let's see.
Is this how next semester is going to be laid out?
As far as what?
Just like doing this Microsoft Teams and stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you say, yeah, I hate it, well, I mean, that's a decision that they have made. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to take the class in fall in St. Louis, you can still take it in a seated section. The other thing they may end up doing, and I mentioned this the other day, is they may say, you know what, these 2 guys are going to be done in December. Why don't we have this one as seated? You know, I don't know exactly what they're going to do, to be honest with you. I mean,
Gotcha.
when I found this out that we were even doing it this way, like not very long before they actually made their decision to do it this way.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
all right, send it to myself too. All right, so let me attach this. Trying to figure out what that means. Oh, I'll bet you since it's an XML file, it's not going to let me send it. So I got to put it into a folder. Oh, an XML file. And I'll put it in there, move it there, and then zip that. And I'll send you that. All right, you should all have that now. So replace your existing XML file with that, but again, take it, in fact, make sure that you keep yours. So take your file and copy it someplace and then replace it with this one. And like I said, Gabriel saw that Android was spelled wrong. That should be fixed, but your path, the path name that you've got, your package name is going to have to be changed as well. Hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. And Nick, just so you know too, I mean, normally it's not going to be this frazzled or whatever. And what I mean is, I'm going to have to go and uninstall this and install it again for tomorrow to try to get it to work. Because normally we'd be doing a lot more stuff together, and I think it would make a lot more sense as we're doing it.
Copy that.
So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we're going to go in, and I should be able to do this. So let's see. Here. All right, I can bring this up at least. Yeah, I went in and tried to change my Gradle version. I tried to do a whole bunch of stuff. It didn't like it. I tried to remove the Gradle file and recreate it. It didn't like that. So I'm going to have to, hopefully after class today, just fix that. When you're done, please bring up your main activity.java file. And we'll start on this. This will probably take us 15 minutes or so to do.
And then here in a moment, could we see your strings, your strings values?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I don't think this is going to work, but let me try one last thing here. All right. And that is, I'm going to do a file, exit from here. And I'm going to come in here and go back to Android Studio. No, not from there. Doggone it. Let's see if it'll let me run the one that I've already got that works. All right, I don't know if it'll do this or not, so I'm going to have to get rid of this one, so close this project and bring up the other one. That's fine. Open. This is the one that works, so. All right. And I'll bring that one up as well. So let's see. There's my strings. Or strings.xml file. And to be honest with you, I don't even think I'm using these anymore. I went back and rewrote it, but it's been a while, so. It won't hurt, but you might have 2 or 3 extraneous strings in there you really don't need. Does everybody have this strings file? Anybody still
Not just
working
yet.
on it? What's that?
I'm still working on it.
Yeah. Don't have it
Sorry.
just yet.
And Nick, just so you know, I mean, you know, I've been teaching this the whole semester, all 20 days now for the C# class like this. We've never had any problems. Everything's worked fine. Except some people, you know, it's much easier to explain to people how to use Git and GitHub in person as opposed to trying to do it over the internet.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but they've had no problems. You know, everybody's turned in their homework and everything else. It hasn't been a big issue. A couple people are still, rather than just having one repo, they're making repos for everything they do, and that doesn't make me pleased. But
It happens.
well, I mean, they were told now for this particular, they had a test today, and they were told that if they did that, it was 12 points to use an existing repo and put it in there and push it up to GitHub. And if they didn't do that, they could lose anywhere from 1 to 12 of those points.
Roger. My strings file is done.
All right. Anybody still working on it, or is everybody done?
I'm done.
All right. So what should happen now when we run this, not yet, not you guys yet, but when we put our code in there, and I'm going to go over the code in just a bit. But this is, I think I even showed this in class yesterday or the day before, but I do want you all to see it. All right. And that is, the interface is kind of ugly. I guess I made these too big, but you get the idea. So you come in here and your bill is $100. All right. Then you come in here. This is the seek bar. It's like a slider in other languages. But if I come over here, what did I do? I just gave a 27% tip. All right. Oh, that's too much. I can move it down to about 20. All right. So that's what we're doing in here. And we're bringing in the answer with the final thing with a toast. All right. In fact, if I click here and I close this, there's nothing else here. All right. So you should be able to see everything is what I'm saying to you. All right. So I'm taking for granted now that you've all got the XML file. This one. All right. You copy that one in and your interface looks pretty much like the one I just showed you. You change this so that the package name is got your package name in it. And how do you get that? Again, that should be what's right here. Notice edu Rankin JP Scott tip calculator, edu Rankin JP Scott tip calculator. So whatever you put in there, whatever you have for your package name on the top should be what goes in there for you. Hopefully what I just said makes sense. All right. Now, rather than having me come in and retype everything, I'm going to let you type it. But before we do, I literally want to take about, just give me 5 minutes to explain it. This stuff should make sense. There's our 3 edit texts right there. So this is the amount of the bill. This is the amount of the tip. That's the text. That's the total. And actually, now that I look at those, rather than edit text, really those should have been text views. It works fine the way it is. All right. This is the seek bar. And this is the toast that we'll write. So go ahead, if you would, please, go ahead and add those. So add these 5 lines right here. And when you get done, then you can add these 5 or these 4 lines down there. All right, so add these first. Make sure you put them as it says right underneath the public class. Don't put them under on create. Tab that over too. There we go. This is probably not going to be one that you're going to want to put into your portfolio, because if I'm a prospective employer, I'm going to ask, why did you take the tip and the total and make them edit text instead of text views? When you put these in, you're going to get errors until you do the Alt Enter, and those will put in your, you will need these 3 import statements for those to all work without error. All right, does everybody have these 5 lines here put in?
I do.
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
I'm going to slide that up a little bit. So then you can put in these 4 lines, and then we'll just pick it up from there, okay? There's only 63 lines, and by the time you got those in, you're up to 25 already. Like I said, it'll take 10 or 15 more minutes. All right, so before we go through this, and we're going to right now, but before we go through this, I want to quickly jump back to activity main and bring up the seek bar. All right. Right now, there's not a whole heck of a lot of stuff in there. But if I go back and let's see, if I go to my activity main and go to design view and I go to the seek bar, there's a lot of stuff that you can provide for this, just so you're aware of that. All right. You can set min and max. You can set all sorts of different stuff in there if you want to do so. All right. All right, let me jump back into here then. So you probably have already figured this out, but when you look at this, anytime that you move the seek bar, what happens is a change listener event is taking place. When you put in the change listener event like this, you have to actually add 3 different methods. You have to bring in an on progress changed, an on starting touch, and an on stop touch. And you'll notice that for these 2, I'm not even adding any code, but you have to put them in anyway, because when you do, so you can type this in. If you type in this right here, and then type in new S like that and hit tab, That should basically start to fill it out for you. But you'll see if you look right here, the only one that we're actually adding code to is on stop tracking touch. That means that you've stopped moving the track bar, or the seat bar rather. And we're going to call this thing that starts on line 45 that I'll show you in a minute. But I'll give you about 5 minutes, depending on how you put that in, to get this done. Then we've already got 40. We're up to line 43. There's 20 lines left and we're finished.
If you guys hit tab, it'll autofill everything, so it shouldn't take as long to fill in.
Yep. But you have to put in this. Oops.
Well, yeah, but that's the one line compared to
Right. So is everybody
7 or 6 other lines.
Does everybody have all this stuff in there? If anybody still needs some more time, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go on.
I got it.
I'm good.
I'm good.
All right.
I got it.
So this is the rest of the program right here. I'll leave that up there. It's 1:34. I'll leave that up there for about 5 or 10 minutes. As soon as you say it's done, that everybody's done, save it and try to run it and see if it works. If it doesn't work, see if you can figure out what the problem is. But if you cannot debug it, as long as you've got this keyed in, make sure that by the end of the day, just stick it in a repo and you know, I'll make it worth like 10 points. All right. Or put it in one of your existing repos would be even better. You've got homework repos, just throw it in there. Like I said, I'll give you 5 more minutes. I want to go over this code and then we'll just call it a period. I got to get another water, so I'll be right back.
And mine works.
All right, even if you're not finished or it's not working or whatever, I want to talk about just a couple things that are in here. All right, first of all, this should make sense. It should make sense to all of you. And what that is doing is it's saying grab whatever the, that bill amount was. And remember, the bill amount is this right here. All right, so take that and remember that automatically goes in as a string. We want to convert it to a double. Well, there is no convert.toDouble or a try parse like we have in C#. So we can say double dot value of like that. All right. And then when we do this, we give it the name of the edit text dot get text, but we have to convert it over to a string. So again, that's saying take whatever we put into that edit text and stick it into our double variable called bill amount. These should make sense because for our percentage, it's going in as a regular number. So for instance, this will take 7 for 7% and it'll change it to 0.07. That should make sense. And then our total is just our bill plus our tip. This stuff might look a little new to you, all right? And this is a fairly new thing that they put into Java, and really they ripped it off from the C programming language, all right? I'm using a string.format there as opposed to putting in some kind of a pattern, a decimal format like we've been using. You'll see both of them out in the field. But what's nice about this is I put the $ in there, but I say %.2. So this says whatever tip is, make sure that you put it as a floating point, and double and floating point are looked at as the same way in this language, but make sure that you do that with 2 decimal places. All right. Does what I'm saying make sense?
Yes.
Right. Is there anybody who it didn't work at all and you have no idea why?
Nope.
All right, so everyone's worked, is that correct?
Yep.
Nick's
Yep.
did.
All right, then, like I said, take this, hopefully you've got some kind of repo that you've been using. Throw it into that repo and send me an invitation to it, and make sure you do that before class starts tomorrow. Fair enough?
Sounds
Right.
good.
Okay, I will
Sounds
see you
good.
tomorrow.
Sounds
I will
good.
see you all tomorrow then. We'll plan on probably being right here and doing it the same way. And hopefully my machine will work a little better. All right, I'll talk to you then.
All right, see you.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
See ya.
See you.
Have a nice day.
You too.
Goodbye.